On this episode of ResiWeek, we talk growing in the post-pandemic era, the supply chain, and remote work. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is ResiWeek, episode 361, best of 2022. Welcome to this episode of ResiWeek. This is your weekly roundup of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. Or at least usually it is. But instead this week, we are going to do our yearly wrap-up show with all the biggest, in quotes, literally the biggest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matt D. Scott for AVNation.tv. All right, we are going to kick it off. We covered a ton of stuff this year, but we're going to kind of kick off our top three most popular episodes. It feels like every time we get to the end of the year show, it has been an interesting one, and we say as much. But 2022 was definitely highly eventful in the residential space. Shows like Infocom, ISC, and CEDIA Expo returned to the physical realm, and although many companies are bringing their workforces back into the office, there are still a good number of remote and hybrid employees looking to set up their home office spaces. We've even managed to gain some ground back in the ongoing supply chain shortage systems, although that is definitely still a slow process. So we're going to start off with ResiWeek episode 325. It was right off the heels of HTSA's 2020 Spring Conference. Integrators were asked about their plans for growing their business in a post-pandemic market. We were joined by Katie McGregor-Bennett and Avi Rosenthal to join us in a discussion of how integrators can step up to be the authority on anything tech-related in their homes.
You and I have talked about this a million times. One of the things I love to rib you at trade shows about is, remember that interview we did with Aiheji like 10 years ago? And you were like, what do you call them?
Aiheji?
And the point of me not having you getting to rib you about that one more time, but way back in the day, like 10 plus years ago, their tagline was own the network, own the home. And it was a really hard concept to get through to the industry and to the consumer on the other side of what exactly does that mean. And it was really just forecasting what the future was going to hold, which is the critical nature of the network in the modern residence and anymore. I mean, I'm not talking about design modern. I'm talking about just the homes we live in today. Just like you wouldn't not have electrical or plumbing, you also really don't have a home without some sort of an internet backbone. And now that there's more work being done from home, we were talking about this before we started recording, even customer service is being done from the bed, not here, but elsewhere. The network that has to be in that, okay, maybe sometimes, but the network that has to be there to support the structure of the home, it really does need to be more and more robust. And it's a fact of life. It's one that I'm rejoicing and celebrating on behalf of my clients, but also finally for our industry, getting the recognition that we deserve and the importance of that network being properly structured, properly secured, and properly supported. And I think, now is the time for us to go, hey, hallelujah, finally, now we have a consumer audience that really understands and hopefully respects the value of the work that the integration community does and that the manufacturing community brings to the table. Off the shelf is no longer good enough, and it really needs to be questioned and scrutinized. And I think that's really what this message is all about. And I think, the integration community really is finding their stride and finding new opportunities to expand their businesses and really be more of an important role. And again, it comes back to that. Now they own the network, they can own the home.
First of all, I think it's great for the integration community because I completely agree with Katie when she talks about how we now own the network. Owning the network is not just about the network, but every single device that's connected to it. So if you're not looking at things like battery backup, right, charging vehicles, solar panels, conversion generators, if you're not intimately involved with a lot of these systems, your builder partners and your homeowners are going to start to look for somebody who is. I myself have started consulting with a number of builders. During the building boom, I was approached by not only some of my previous builders from like way back in the day, but some builders found me at a trade show and online as well and brought me in as their technology consultant. Now, I'm not becoming an integrator again. I'm too old to be up in attics pulling wire. I get it. It's okay. I own it. It's all right. But the knowledge base in having to understand how everything goes together and the difference between a strong network and a weak network and what that means to a homeowner when they move in and they want to connect all these smart devices is very, very important. And it all comes back to the reputation of the person building the house. So if we are not the GC, which certainly we're not building the sticks and the roofs and the walls and all of that, what we're putting behind all of that and what we're establishing to run everything once it's done is just as important as making sure the roof doesn't leak. And I think that the good integrators are going to embrace that. They're going to embrace the position that they're being placed in. It's sort of like, we always put the architects up on this pedestal, right? They were always, we have to go talk to the architect. Let them put us on the same pedestal. Let us put on the same pedestal as the architect. You're going to design the structure. You're going to design the HVAC system and the way that the plumbing drains and all of that. At the same time, you need an expert to know how everything goes together. And again, what Katie mentioned, not only is it positive for the integrator, but proof of that is that the manufacturers are now stepping up. Very large networking hardware companies are recognizing the potential within the integration business, and they're coming to the integrators to say, hey, we want to be a part of what you're installing. You are now the specifier of the equipment going into this home, and we want to talk to you. The same way we used to curry favor with the architects and the lighting designers when it came to technology, the networking hardware manufacturers are going to curry favor with the integrators, which I don't want to get too ahead of your stories, but you have a story in there about buying groups that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Why is that company currying favor with all 4 buying groups? Because they know at the end of the day, the integrator is the designer, is the person specifying what's going into the home. Own the network, own the home, own the integrator, get the sales.
Even though we are in a post-pandemic market, we are still actually having trouble literally getting product. The supply chain issues have been, at this point, have become a staple for both the ResiWeek world and the AVWeek world. Every tech-related vertical is feeling the crunch, to the point that some companies like Crestron and literally almost every other company have had to be extremely candid about their product availability. The wonderful Richard Fregosa took over for ResiWeek 344, where he, Alex Capicilantro, and Jeremy Glowacki talked about the state of supply chains for manufacturers and the industries as a whole.
I was very impressed with Crestron's transparency in this. I didn't read defensiveness from them. It's a company leadership that's different than even recent years, and I just felt like the way that they handled this was very clear, very educational. I learned a lot. I felt like, as a media person, I'm always looking for the spin, and I didn't feel like I was being spun. I did feel like perhaps, like Alex said, that they didn't do everything that they needed to do early on. They made a strong case, and maybe parts that Alex didn't hear, for the efforts that they had made, but they also said that going to sort of the open market for certain missing components, you have to be careful about quality control. So there's a lot of time involved in that. And they also mentioned something that just you don't really think about some of these circuit boards, and that there are pieces that in early times, pre-COVID times, seem fairly commodity-like, little power supplies and things that are just pennies that are just not available because of that foundry issue. Thousands of pieces that go into a circuit board from 200 some manufacturers, they said. So just a crazy number of pieces that go together to make the operations behind the scenes on these products. So I felt like obviously the dealer's response, no one's going to be pleased with this. It's not like giving us the full transparent answer really solves the problem, which is that they've got clients that are expecting systems to be completed, and they keep getting pushed around on deadlines and time, frames, and the dealers have to pass along bad information repeatedly to these clients who are probably very demanding people, just in the way that they are high net worth individuals who are trying to complete their homes, and anyone, I don't care who you are, you're doing a home project, you want it to get done in a timely fashion. And these folks are dealing with 18 to 24 months of just delays and, excuses. And the dealers are stuck in between. They can't do anything about it. Manufacturers tell them one thing and then they change it because the supplier to the manufacturer changes their story. So it's a lot of frustration. There's not a lot of easy answers. The only sort of light at the end of the tunnel I sort of got toward the end of it was that they're starting to see some of the ports clearing up. The shipping container prices are starting to go down, which is a good sign. And the predictability is starting to improve in the last 6 weeks. So it seems like that they're getting closer to clearing some of these delays. It's going to still be into next year, perhaps into second quarter of next year. But I was just looking for some just tiny bit of optimism, and that's as close as I got to anything at the end, unfortunately. But again, I think Alex makes a great point, and I have to take his word for it as a manufacturer. Maybe there were things that could have been done, but it's also a pretty big manufacturer with a lot of moving parts. So I also kind of see their side of it too, and it's a challenging time for everybody.
Well, not necessarily to end it on a downer, because really we aren't. I mean, we know that these are items that are going to improve. We just know that they're not necessarily going to improve at the speed that we've been used to in the industry. But there's a lot there. I know that the reports, I've had a long-standing relationship with Crestron for going on 30 years. And we have seen many of the challenges that we're talking about, but absolutely, Alex does make a good point, which is, taking plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. This is the nature of the industry. It's obviously Crestron's not the only company that's been affected by it. Some have been able to navigate it better than others, but it is still a process that dealers need to look into. And actually, I was going to ask a second, because we're going to wrap up in a moment, but what should dealers be looking to do as we're going to be navigating roughly, Jeremy, I think you're saying probably 3 more quarters, possibly 4 more quarters before we start seeing things starting to normalize. What's the advice that you've been able to give dealers?
Oh, me personally?
Well, both of you. I just want to see that. I mean, if you had a dealer in front of you that said, hey, how am I going to navigate these next 9 months, 12 months, which is, again, you obviously you have a huge outreach to the dealers, and again, it's the we'd love to be able to soothe all of their concerns, but you have had the ability to see a lot of what's out there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from my perspective that so many of the dealers that I talk to, frankly, they're survivors out there. They're entrepreneurs who have gone through the school of hard knocks throughout their career. They know how to get through this better than I can tell them how to get through it. They've lived it, and they're going to find alternative sources for product and try new things. Unfortunately, there are certain things that they just aren't going to be able to get, and maybe that affects this type of project that they're trying to complete. So there may not be a good replacement piece there. There's not everything has a solution right now, unfortunately. So you just kind of have to get in line and hope that your clients don't just give up on everything that you're trying to work with them on. But there were problems early on with receivers. There were problems with TVs. Things get caught up, and then other things are still a problem with control pieces. So it's, I guess, just adjusting the type of project that they're designing for the time being, and looking the short term versus the long term. So it's, I gotta say, there's not an easy answer for that one. It's just that I think these guys have been doing this for so long, they will find their channels. And the buying groups have been really great for them too. To be honest, I've talked to some folks here in buying groups. They've been able to really help. And as much as they don't want to be called buying groups anymore, I think that part of their kind of name actually comes to bear right now. They can pull together some resources, and also peer-to-peer buying group members. You feel trusting guy in another state that you're not competing directly with. It's a part of your same group, and you say, hey, I need this missing piece. Can you help me out? Do you have any inventory? Some of them have been able to purchase inventory, and they don't necessarily need it all at once. They're just planning ahead, and they can help each other out. I've heard that happening too. So there's a lot of survivors out there.
Well, Alex, I'm going to let you take us out on this one. Again, we are hearing these reports that and they're kind of following suit with the reports that we were getting last year. Everybody kind of hemmed and hawed over, hearing 2023 was going to be the time that we would start cresting the wave. And here we are, almost 3/4 of the way through 2022. But as a manufacturer, what is your advice? And again, calling from the CDS side, what is that advice for those, not necessarily the established dealers, but also the new dealers are going, hey, this is the first time that I've had to deal with these kind of challenges?
Yeah, so from my perspective, we're still seeing a lot of dealers buying product just in time. When you purchase through the Josh store, there's an option to say, ship it immediately, I need a rush order. And that happens all the time. And fortunately for dealers, we've had inventory in stock. But what happens if we don't? What happens, like many other manufacturers, when you can't get the product just in time? And so I do recommend stocking some amount of inventory, at least if you know you have projects coming up, you know you're going to need the product. I have heard other manufacturers saying the opposite, saying, hey, if you don't need it now, let another dealer get it, wait till you need it. But my attitude is stay on the community pages. If you see a dealer saying that they need a certain product that you have, be willing to offer it to them if you have that ability. But otherwise, stocking and holding inventory is your best bet to have product for your client. And so I recommend, if you have the cash on hand and you know the projects are coming up, buy early if you want to make sure that you can install it when your client needs it.
Finally, in our last show, we look at a question that was posited by CE Pro in one of their articles. Is remote work and hybrid work destroying company culture? Sure, that title's a little clickbaity, but it definitely works, since we had a great discussion about it in ResiWeek episode 322. Mitchell Klein and Jeremy Glowacki joined us to look at how the work from home movement has changed the dynamics in many businesses and what that will look like going forward.
Just for reference, we're a global organization. We've got offices all around the world, and having to force everyone to do Zoom type and remote work actually was a phenomenal opportunity for everybody to get to know everybody and flatten the management structure. So the overall, as much as it was frustrating, the overall experience was phenomenal. And I think that first part of that study is right on. It really helped to grow corporate culture. The downside to that is, okay, now that people start coming back to work, our company has offered up a flex opportunity where each individual site can determine, what does a flex mean? Some sites say you got to come in twice a week, some say 3 times a week, others permit, a full-time off-site. And sites will typically say, okay, on, say, every Thursday, everyone comes in, so you have this, kumbaya moment, if you will. But I am very confident that within the next year or so, people who are on this flex program, who've given up their desks, are going to start feeling left out. That whole FOMO thing you hear about, there's no question in my mind when they do the happy hour, or they bring the lunch in, or they have the guest speaker, being remote in is definitely going to detract away from the closeness and the camaraderie. It's not going to help it.
That's a real good point, Mitchell. Jeremy, if we kind of preclude the last, 2 years, there's always been those companies where there's one random team member who's in Idaho and the rest of the team is down in Albuquerque. And it's, they're a part of the team, they're helping out a ton, but yeah, they get zoomed in when they're doing an all hands meeting and they're kind of there and they're kind of a part of it, but they're up on the screen by themselves and it's weird. But they also miss out on, when donuts come in, or when the team decides to go out for lunch, or to the pub afterwards and do all the little team building things that half the time are unplanned and more successful than the planned team building. But is there a way that the AV community can help employers and employees try to shrink that gap when it's not so pandemic necessary, right? As we're coming out of this, is there a way that we can come in and kind of do an after action report and then try to help, again, all aspects of the people involved in this utilize remote better.
Yeah, it's fun. I was starting to laugh a little bit as you're describing that one random person, because I was that random person for a while with my company. Yeah, I worked in a New York office for many years, and when technology got to a point where I could move back to my hometown, I moved back, and what wasn't really in the cards then was the video conferencing yet, and Zoom wasn't really a thing. It kind of developed over time, but at that point, it was more of like a Slack community thing, or some kind of a, I don't know, like a instant message kind of situation. And that became the new water cooler for me temporarily. So then technology evolves, and Slack channels still exist with companies. And it's still a very good communication tool to have real-time conversations just typed in. But I think when we were considering doing a follow-up to the Crestron acquisition of One Beyond, and we've got Henry Clifford's doing a review for us this week on the Vadio IntelliShot auto tracking camera. And these kind of technologies that sort of track people in the room so you can get up and move around, or you can have multiple people, from the standpoint of that person watching a room full of their colleagues and their remote. When they speak, the camera will adjust and zoom in on that person, so you can have a more interesting dynamic experience from a video conferencing standpoint. You're never going to get that full cultural experience. That was a thing that I very much fully realized I was missing out on when Christmas rolled around and you had a holiday party and everybody's bringing in something. And it's like the cheap version of a holiday party where it's a what do you call it when everybody brings something? It's a
like a Secret Santa or something?
No, like food. Like
like a potluck.
Potluck, yes.
Yeah.
And in a way, I was like, thank God I don't have to bring something to the potluck. That seems like, why can't the company fork over a restaurant bill or something? Go out to eat. But then there was just like a fun thing. You hear, oh yeah, this guy, they really love their chili and they're going to bring their chili, and you did feel that FOMO, and it was unfortunate. So it's hard to really mimic the culture. But I think because so many of us have now been in this remote situation, it's maybe a different expectation of what that culture needs to be. And as long as you're able to connect and see your colleagues and have a regularly scheduled visual representation of who you're working with, you don't feel completely isolated and out of it. And it's a very oddly, the idea of Zoom, which seems like kind of cold and distant, there's a intimacy to it too. I mean, you're inviting someone into your space if it's your home or whatever. And yeah, it can be awkward if you're in a single room apartment and you're sharing space. But I can now interview people that are fairly famous, and I am almost one-on-one in their space. Like, it's a really weird intimacy that didn't exist before. We do a phone call and it's not the same in the old days. Now you're right there. So there's something to be said for the video conferencing, even though we've all kind of gotten burned out by it. I think we've also come to realize that it's on our own terms. You can be there and kind of crop your world and show them, this is my hotel room or my condo at the beach, and you can see what you need to see, but not the bathing suits hanging off the chair and the out of the frame, that type of thing.
Well, that's going to wrap up our best of the year episode. Thank you again for joining us throughout this entire year. We greatly appreciate your continued support. If you'd like to connect with me, you can reach me on Twitter at Matt D. Scott and most other social platforms. But more importantly, please visit AVNation.tv, where you'll find this show as well as a wide variety of other shows with all the verticals that we cover. When you visit the website, please take a moment to check out our supporters. We are extremely thankful for their support and ask that you check them out as well. Thanks again for watching. That's all the time we have for this episode of ResiWeek.